infrastructure, in industry, in agriculture, that will be captured by economic development, whereas the only value addition would be captured by economic growth. So economic growth is a limited concept. Economic development is a much broader concept than which goes beyond economic growth alone and talks about a qualitative improvement in the overall situation prevailing in the country. Yeah. Take the case of development of any institution, economic institution, banking system. The quality of banking system will never be captured. Quality of the banking system will never be captured in economic growth. Can it be? No. Because they continue to make value addition. But if the NPAs of government are very high and banks are in stress as they are today, public sector banks are under a lot of stress today. So if there is a situation like that, if the financial sector reforms have not taken place, the institutional debt market is not developed, stock market is not evolved, these are the issues of economic development. They will ultimately reflect in economic growth, but they are not part of economic growth. Economic growth only measures what is the value addition that the country is making. The reasons can be many. Improving productivity, but it would also mean qualitative improvement in a whole lot of institutional factors, which ultimately have a bearing also on economic growth. Okay?
So what would be the impact of
Make in India concept will definitely add to investment in our country, or that is expected to add. That is what Narendra Modi is doing. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going around trying to get foreign direct investment. Make in India will also be in. We have invited now CEOs at big companies worldwide, and we are exhibiting what we have, and we are making an appeal to them to come and produce here. Now, how will they come and produce here? Two ways. One most important way is that they will make direct foreign investment in our country. And they will be part owner of joint venture between the local industrialist or local businessman and their own outfits. So they will be producing here. When they produce here, they are doing two things. One is that they're making investment. That investment will be part of GDP because the overall GDP is the sum total of consumption, investment, government expenditure, plus exports minus imports. That is one way of looking at GDP. Composition of GDP would be the consumption, investment. Please understand, this investment is not the financial investment. When you put money in the stock market, you call it investment. That is not what we are talking about here. When I talk about investment, it is macroeconomic investment. What is this investment? This investment means addition to the production capacity, not putting money in the stock market. That is a financial investment, whereas this one is the true macroeconomic investment which will form the basis of production in future. Like, yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
And then another country labor cheap. Would that investment move from this country?
It can, but it's not that flexible because there are all kinds of restrictions on movement of labor, A, and B, most importantly, typically the foreign direct investors do not look at the short term. They look at the medium term. They want to see over a period of time, does this country have a potential? This is what they look at. That is why, please take a look at Narendra Modi's speech made that day. He has made a big salesmanship pitch why it is important and how this is an opportunity for you to come over. So he is trying to convince them. But half of the numbers that he was giving was wrong. They were wrong, basically. And I mentioned that, and that has been published by one of the newspapers, which I really regret, because they have started asking me, why are you saying this and all that. But that apart, the point is, he made the right kind of pitch. So when we get foreign direct investment, the extent of foreign direct investment immediately becomes part of production, part of GDP. Two, that investment will produce jobs, will create job. It will also make its own value addition, again, addition to the GDP over a period of time. Okay, there is a gestation period. ऐसे तो नहीं है कि investment आज आ गया, कल से production चालू हो गया. The investment has a gestation period. Now, the investment made can go here or there. In principle, the answer is yes. But in reality, that is exceedingly difficult because of the labor laws which are involved. Because you can't get a visa to work in America, for example. Tomorrow, if the labor is cheap in America, labor is too expensive and you want to go there. Now, if you compare the wage rate in United States and India, their wage rate is much higher. But are they willing to take the Indian people to go and work there? No. So there are all kinds of restrictions. Similarly, other countries which are competing with India, of course, will try to entice, but people take a look at, the investors will look at following things. Most importantly, the future potential of this country. India has great potential. Second, what they see is ease of doing business. We are very low on that. Modi ji has talked about our position has improved by 10 positions. What he forgot to tell, that out of 130 countries surveyed, ours was 128. So we were really at the rock bottom. From the rock bottom, we have come into the 90th percentile. That's not a great improvement at all. We have a long way to go. So that's why he's fully aware of that. So we are trying to do that. So that kind of thing would happen only if investment comes in, investment stays in, adds to the GDP, adds to the jobs, and makes more value addition. That will promote the growth. That is the only way Indian economy can accelerate. I have been saying this time and again, that although 7.5% growth rate of India today is very impressive, no doubt, and we are number one today among the large economies. However, you must understand that we are still below our own potential growth. Our potential growth is 8% plus. That means we are not exploiting our own potential to the fullest possible extent. And therefore, there's no room for complacency. What is our target? In the next 3 years, we should hope at touching the 10%. We have never crossed 10% in a sustained manner. So we will get an opportunity. We have this opportunity. If what Modi ji is trying to do fructifies, and if we as a country respond, well, it will move up certainly, and we will be number one, but not at 7.5%. We'll be number one at 10% plus. Now that is something that we are dreaming or hoping, or that is what Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision is, and we'll see how things actually turn out. So we talked about economic growth versus economic development. Now, there are two more terms. There are two more terms which are in the context of growth particularly, which are often repeated in public debate and discussion. One is sustainable growth, another is inclusive growth. Let us try to understand the meaning of sustainable and inclusive growth and development. You know the difference between growth and development. Now let's understand these adjectives which are used but not fully understood. What is sustainable growth? Sustainable growth means whether your growth trajectory is sustained over a period of time. because, you know, it is a great thing to hit a century once in a while, but it is a tough job, like Vinod Kamli did. Vinod Kamli started his career with two double centuries, you know, better than Sachin. But afterwards, what happened? He could not sustain that. So he was gone. Look at Sachin Tendulkar, his batchmate, classmate, and dear friend. Consistently, he played very well, and that's why he added so many centuries, right? Sustainable development or sustainable growth means not only being confined to a spike, 10% growth in a particular year, but next year, 5% pe aa gaya, a year further down, it goes to 2% or even negative growth. Then again, it bounces back. No, that is not sustainable growth. What we are talking about, high growth, and high growth should be sustainable in the sense that consistently we should keep that level. Like China did. China had consistently had more than 10% growth for 25 years. That is a miracle. The big challenge would be, so sustainable growth would mean achieving a high growth rate and staying there. You know, who said that? I think somebody said that it's not very difficult to scale the height like Mount Everest. But how long can you remain there? You know, nobody wants to stay there for too long. But the point is, reaching a height and staying at that is a much bigger challenge than reaching the height alone. That is the point that I'm making. That is sustainable growth. What is the meaning of inclusive growth? You see, a lot of people complain that yes, growth rate is rising. Lekin hamara kya hai? The poor people are suffering, inequalities are high. So what does that growth mean? Growth for whom? Shining India. Remember the campaign of BAP in 2004 which failed? Shining, India is shining. Yes, India was shining. But for whom was the question that was asked. So when we talk about growth, particularly it has to be inclusive growth in the sense that in the growth process, all the different strata of society should be involved. It should not be the national growth which originates into a particular section of society, either the corporates or big industrialists or anybody. It should be all the constituents of the society should be partaking. They should be participating in the growth process. Then alone it can be called inclusive growth. So inclusive growth is a concept. Sustainable growth I have explained, inclusive growth I have explained. Inclusive growth would always mean participation by all the different strata of society. It is my favorite thesis, and I have been saying this for the last 1 year, wherever I can. Please understand that achieving high growth, say 10% growth, is not difficult for India at all. We can make it. We can make it. Question is, can that be sustainable? That there is a big question mark about that. You have a question? Yeah. That is the thesis that I have. I am saying that high growth will not be sustainable unless it is inclusive growth. Please take this statement. I am saying that high growth can be sustained if and only if it is inclusive. If it is not inclusive growth, you may achieve high growth but will not be able to sustain. That's one of my favorite theses. Yeah. No, it was not inclusive growth. It was inclusive growth, but not, about China, there are many questions. Whatever information comes out of China, you have to put many question marks. For example, the financial system in China. If you give what is the official version of the NPAs of the banking system in China, very impressive. They have come down. No analyst today, even when China was doing well, now China is doing badly, but even when China was doing well, they would say that ये लोग अगर बोल रहे हैं ना 5% पर आया है एनपीए, 5% और ऐड करो, that is the correct number. So for communist countries and countries like earlier Soviet Union and China, all data are not to be, all data are to be taken with a pinch of salt, as they say. So in China, while the growth has been inclusive to some extent, I don't think it has been perfectly balanced in terms of all the strata of society. It never can be. That would be an utopian idea that everybody participates in an equal manner. That just cannot happen. But we should be moving in that direction. Let us go back to what Mahatma Gandhi, the person who talked about sustainable development for the first time was Mahatma Gandhi. Very interestingly, he was the one who talked about sustainable growth, and he also talked about inclusive growth. Let us see what Mahatma Gandhi said about sustainable growth. He was really, in some sense, you may agree or may not agree about everything that he says, but he was a great visionary. And many things, it becomes very clear, and this is one of them. Sustainable development. He said sustainable development aims at improving human well-being, particularly by alleviating poverty, by increasing gender equality, striving for social justice and equitability, improving health, promoting quality education, providing a conducive environment, and augmenting human resources, and ensuring stewardship of the rural environment. I'll read this again. This is so important that you should notice this. You should note this. Sustainable development, according to Mahatma Gandhi, it aims at improving human well-being, particularly by alleviating poverty, by increasing gender equality, by striving for social justice and equitability, by improving health, promoting quality education, providing a conducive working environment, and augmenting human resources, and ensuring stewardship of the rural environment. Accepting the stewardship of the rural environment, personally, I agree with all the rest. But please understand, Gandhiji was talking about this when rural environment was very important. That was the time when 77%, until 1951, 77% of the Indian population derived its livelihood from agriculture. And agriculture constituted 52% of the GDP of the country at that time. Today, about 57% are deriving their livelihood from agriculture, but the share of agriculture in GDP has come down to about 14-15%. It was 17% 2 years back, but this year I'm told that it is about 14-15%. So rural environment does not have the stewardship as Mahatma Ji was saying, but all other what he is saying is entirely valid. He also believed in all-inclusive growth. What did he say about the inclusive growth? See the vision. He said that a free India, he has said this before India got the independence, he said that a free India would be judged by the way it served the common man in matters of food, clothing, and social services, and the way it ensured equalities among people, irrespective of their caste, creed, and community to which they belong. Again, a very, very quotable quote. He says that a free India would be judged by the way it served the common man in matters of food, clothing, and social services, and the way it ensured equalities among the people, irrespective of their caste, creed, and community which they belong. Gandhiji had laid down the guidelines for those working to eradicate poverty. He also said in another place that independence, which had nothing to offer to or lift the poor from their miserable plight remained a mirage, an illusion of little meaning or significance. Every word is very important. Gandhiji is saying that when you talk about independence, if independence, क्या होगा after independence? We're talking about economic growth होगा, ठीक है. Now we are talking about, he said that independence which had nothing to do or nothing to offer to or nothing to lift the poor from the miserable plight that they are in, it was a mirage, an illusion of little meaning and significance. I think these are timeless words that we must all remember. In fact, he gave a talisman, and that's, again, you have seen that in the boards, but I would love to read that. It's very important. Whenever, he says, Bapuji says, whenever you are in doubt or self becomes too much with you, apply the following tests. Recall the fate of the poorest and the weakest man who you may have seen, and ask yourself if the step that you are contemplating is going to be of any use to him. Will he gain anything by it? Will it restore him to a control over his own life and destiny? In other words, will it lead to swarg for the hungry and spiritually starving millions? Then you will find your doubts and yourself melting away. Now, this is easier said than done, but all bureaucrats, all policymakers must keep this talisman in their mind, that whenever you're forming a new policy, you have to think, what is the effect going to be on the last man? Antyodaya was the concept that Bapuji talked about. So what is the effect of this on that last man? Somebody had, Shiv Sena has raised objection to Make in India, and I don't normally agree with Shiv Sena, but one thing that Uddhav Thackeray said caught my attention this morning. He said that in this Make in India, there are no farmers involved. Where are the farmers? Which is true. Farmers are committing suicide in very large number. So you are inviting everybody around the world to come here and manufacture here. Nobody is paying any attention to farmers. Sad reality. That is where Bapuji is saying is very important. I'm not saying Make in India is wrong, but inclusiveness, if you look at it from the lens of inclusiveness, I think it is important to see that it does not meet the test that was given by Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi is another very interesting thing. Mahatma Gandhi, his understanding of ecological and environmental dimensions of economic development are phenomenal. Phenomenal. I am overwhelmed with his ideas on even the first one. Remember, now everybody talks about environment. He talked about it then and long before anybody else. What did he say? You know, his understanding of the ecological and environmental dimensions of development were clearly way ahead of his time. Many years after Gandhiji's death, then came the notion of sustainable growth and development, right? These terms came much later, although Bapuji had talked about it in substance, not with the same term. You know, what is the modern day definition of sustainable development? Modern day definition of the sustainable development is this. It is that form of development which would meet the needs of the present generation without compromising on the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Please understand, this is too heavy to hit you in its enormity. what is Gandhiji saying, the modern day definition, which was actually given by Gandhiji in different ways. He said that the sustainable development as it is defined now, in 2009 this was defined, that it is that form of development which would meet needs of the present generation without compromising the future generations, without compromising on the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So what we are doing, the reckless way we are destroying the nature and the natural resources, forest is just one example, but the reckless way that we are doing in the name of growth for today, we are compromising with the future of our future generation. So that is not sustainable growth. So ecological and environmental dimension of economic development was brought in by Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi intuitively had understood this ahead of others, and he made sustainability as a critical requirement for development. These are his words. He said it is a critical requirement of development that it should be pro-people, pro-poor, and conservation-oriented. Conservation meaning conserving the natural resources of the country and the world. Indeed, his famous quote, and I love this quote, that world has enough. The world has enough for everybody's need, but it does not have for everybody's greed. So as far as need is concerned, Vasundhara is enough, capable of producing enough for everybody who is there. But there's no limit to greed. It cannot produce everything. In fact, he was once asked a question, how long? That time the only advanced country was UK. So I'm talking about the 40s maybe, when Great Britain was great and it was a world economic power and all that. So he was asked a question, how long will it take for average Indian to have the same standard of living as people in the Great Britain? His answer is again phenomenal. His answer was something of this effect, that it took the resources of half the world. Remember, British Empire, the sun was never set on British Empire. That was so huge, right? Once upon a time. So he said it took half of the planet's resources to create the standard of living for the Great Britain at level which they are. Now, Great Britain is a small country, but still, to achieve that standard of living, we have taken half the planet's resources of half the planet. Now, for a country of size of India, geographical and population, how many resources of how many planets would be required to reach the level of that particular level? This is something really to think about. Now, this was the general backdrop of growth and development, and sustainable growth, and inclusive growth, and inclusive development.
So what is Ambedkar's view on this?
Ambedkar was a top-class economist, better than Mahatma Gandhi. Dr. Ambedkar, at various points, he proposed many things. He did something on agriculture. He wrote one of his papers on agriculture. But he always thought, Modi ji quoted him just last week in one of the speeches. Why? In the Make India speech also, Modi ji talks about what Dr. Ambedkar was saying, that the surplus labor, the only answer to India's future. There he differed completely from Mahatma Gandhi. Remember, he differed with Mahatma Gandhi in many issues, including this one. He said industrialization is the only answer. If you want to increase the standard of living, industrialization is the only answer. And for that, he said agricultural reforms are needed, which would be such that the surplus labor from agriculture is absorbed in the industry. Today we are growing at 7.5%. But we have miserably failed to absorb the surplus labor of the rural side, rural economy. Just to give you some numbers, I told you a few minutes back that when we started the planning process in 1951, India was producing 52% of its GDP came from agriculture. And I also said that during that period, 77% of the people derived their livelihood from agriculture. Today, what is the contribution of agriculture to our GDP? Contribution of our agriculture to our GDP is about 15%, 14-15%. But 56% people are still dependent on agriculture. There is nothing wrong per se in the share of agriculture going down. Look at the United States. What is the share of agriculture in United States GDP? You'll be surprised. It is 5%. 4 to 5%. But they are able to produce half the world, right? So share of agriculture must go down. That is natural. What happens is that for every country, typically every country is an agrarian country to begin with. Then as it evolves, it becomes more industrial country. And then at the third remove, it becomes service sector oriented country. This is the normal rule. That has not been followed in India. Strangely, India has not followed that. What has happened in India? But before I go to that, everywhere else, the share, a lot of people in India complain the share of agriculture has gone down. Yes, it has gone down, but that's not bad. Nothing wrong, nothing unnatural at all. It happens everywhere. The unnatural thing that has happened in our country is this, that the proportion of our population dependent on agriculture for their livelihood has not come down commensurately. It has come down, but not in the same proportion. 52% GDP share to 14-15% GDP share. But population dependence on agriculture from 77% come down to 56%. So there is an overhang of population in the rural sector. What Ambedkar was saying, going to your question, was that we have to have policies where we would succeed in transferring this agricultural surplus labor to rural surplus labor to the industry. And that is why he was propagating that people should move away from villages to cities. Bapuji, on the other hand, had a notion of Ram Rajya. His concept of Ram Rajya was every village is self-contained. Now that is, in today's world, that is ridiculous. Even the world has become one. So making a village one is questionable, to say the least. Now, what Bapuji was saying is that it should be, everybody should be producing what they need locally, everything, your need should be limited, and your village should be self-contained. He was seen to be against industrialization, which actually he was not, but he has been called as a person who was opposing industrialization. Gandhi, on the other hand, Ambedkar was a staunch proponent. So Gandhiji was telling people to go back to villages and make them self-contained. Ambedkar was saying the opposite. He was saying industrialization is the only way. He was saying that surplus labor from agriculture should be transferred to the industry and to the cities, which is happening now, not adequately, but is happening. And he was saying that Dalits in particular, the people from the marginal strata of society, they should not stay in villages, because he said villages are cesspots. Cesspots, he called them cesspots, where everybody knows your caste and will treat you no matter what is your capability. You would always be treated as a person with that particular vocation that is destined or associated with that caste. Whereas if Dalits come over to cities, they will be working under anonymity, where they can mingle and mix and do things which they were not allowed to do in the villages. So completely diagonally opposite viewpoint. Let's, against the backdrop of this discussion, let us examine where do we stand in terms of inclusiveness, and social justice, and where do we stand in terms of sustainability. Now, here we are going to talk about scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, we're going to talk about nomadic tribes, we're going to talk about minorities, and we are also talking about the senior citizens, the aged. So these are all the vulnerable strata of society. Now, in the remaining part, I'm going to talk about these strata of society. I've spoken about scheduled caste a lot, so I'll give less time to that. I'll speak more about scheduled tribes, nomadic tribes, minorities, and finally, the senior citizens of our country. But before we do that, this can be inclusiveness, as I defined inclusiveness earlier, as whether people from different strata of society are participating. That is a general notion of inclusiveness. But looking at it more closely, inclusiveness can be defined in many different ways. It has many dimensions. One is, I want to talk about 5 different dimensions of inclusiveness. Inclusiveness as poverty reduction. Inclusiveness as a group equality between the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, DNTs, minorities, and so on. Inclusiveness can also be seen as a regional balance, which is very important to many of you. Inclusiveness can also be seen as inequality. Inclusiveness can also be seen as empowerment. So these are 5 different dimensions of inclusiveness that one can think about. Poverty reduction first, group equality second, regional balance is third, fourth is inequality, and fifth is empowerment. I'm going to talk about each one of them now. Now, let's talk about poverty reduction. That is an obvious one. Each one of these dimensions of inclusiveness has its own issues and problems involved. And I want you to be aware, broadly aware of those issues. When we talk about inclusiveness as a poverty reduction, then what we are talking about, whether there is adequate flow of benefits to the poor and to the marginalized. This is the issue when we talk about poverty reduction as a dimension of inclusiveness. Here, it is worth noting that the record of this dimension of inclusiveness is quite encouraging. We have not done very badly. The percentage of population below poverty line has been falling. Even as that happens, the numbers below the poverty line remain large. What I'm saying is that there is a concept of poverty line, and every year we measure, every once in a while we measure the proportion of people below the poverty line. Now the proportion of people below poverty line has been going down in India. Again, there are many issues involved here. Did we talk about that once upon a time? Or earlier batch, poverty measurement by itself is a major issue. What had happened was, originally the concept, we have talked about it? Have we? Have we talked about it? Do you remember? Did we talk about measurement of poverty? Okay. So I need not go through that. So what are the numbers here? There are very serious issues a lot of people are raising, even today. Originally it was B.M. Dandekar, economist from Pune. He gave out some numbers. He gave definition. Then that was revised by my teacher in Mumbai University at that time. And then many years later, each one of them was found unsatisfactory. So they went on improving. Then Suresh Tendulkar, Vijay Tendulkar's brother, again my colleague, his committee was appointed, and he did recalculate every time the methodology was improved, but people raised many objections about these numbers. But whichever way you measure, If you compare like with the like, you have to use the same methodology over the entire period. You can't use methodology A for this and methodology B for that. Then it is not comparable. It's like what we were talking about earlier. So whichever methodology you use, you will find that the proportion of people below poverty line has actually gone down consistently over a period. For example, if you look at the poverty, poverty based on Tendulkar Committee's poverty line, in the year 2009-10, that is the last year for which the data are available, latest data would be available next year or next few months, 29.8% of our population in the year 2009-10 was below poverty line. At once upon a time, 44% of Indian population was below poverty line. That ratio has now come down to, in 2009-10, it came down to 29.8%. And later, the indications are that today it is about 21%, which is very, very impressive. Although one can always say glass is half full or half empty. One can always say, "Arey bhai, dekho, you are saying that great thing has been achieved, but still 21% of the population is below poverty line." So in absolute numbers are still very large. Remember that 21% of 1.27 billion people is very large number. But we have succeeded in bringing the proportion of population below poverty line down, so much so that in absolute number has also absolute number of people above poverty line has actually increased, which is a good idea, because population keeps growing. Even if the ratio comes down, the absolute number of people below poverty line may be rising. That has stopped now, and now the absolute number of people below poverty line has actually gone down, and correspondingly, the absolute number of people above poverty line has gone up. It is also well established that the percentage of the population in poverty has been falling consistently, but the rate of decline was rather slow. If you look at the period between 2004-05 to period 2009-10, these are the financial year, the rate of decline in proportion of people below poverty line was 1.5% per year, which was almost double the rate of decline earlier period, if you take 1993-94 to 2004-05. So if you take that decennial period, the rate at which the proportion of population below poverty line was declining was only 0.75% per year. In the recent period, it has doubled to a decline of 1.5% per year, which is encouraging and good. But it has to continue further. So that is the inclusiveness as poverty reduction. The second one, inclusiveness as a group equality, and that is our familiar territory of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and others. Let us talk about, compare the general population with scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. What do we find there? In terms of, inclusive, the growth process, whatever growth takes place in our country, it has to be seen to be fair by different socio-economic group. That is what we mean. That is what I mean by inclusiveness as group equality. There we talk about scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, OBCs, DNTs, and minorities, and the differently abled, and all other marginal groups. And you can also put women as a disadvantaged group for this purpose. There, I just want to give you an idea. If you look at the proportion, I told you that overall proportion of poverty, people below poverty line in the year 2009-10 was 29.8%. That was combined rural and urban. In the rural area, proportion of people below poverty line was 33.8. In urban area, proportion of people below poverty line was 20.9. So urban areas, the poverty reduction was much better than in the rural area. So about 21% in the urban side, and rural side little more than 33%. That was the national average. Now you break it up by the social classes. What do you find? What you find is that on the rural side, when all India average was 33.8% people below poverty line, in scheduled caste 42.3% people were below poverty line, and in scheduled tribes 47.4% people were below poverty line. On the urban side, if you look at the national average, as I said, to 20.9%, so about 21% were below poverty line. But if you look at scheduled caste, it was 34.11% people below poverty line, and for scheduled tribes, not bad. Here, scheduled tribes have done slightly better than scheduled caste. 30.4% people were below poverty line. You will see that the proportion of people below poverty line in scheduled caste as well as scheduled tribes is considerably higher than the proportion at the national level. The national level includes everything, right? So including scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. If you really break it down between scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and others, you will find that the progress of others is very rapid as compared to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Here what we have is scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and all India. All India includes scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So the difference between them gets somewhat attenuated. Please understand that. So you make an allowance, but if you look at inclusiveness as a group inequality in terms of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, it is very clear based on the available data that scheduled caste and scheduled tribe have fared much worse than what is happening at the national level. So we are still way behind in terms of achieving a reasonable degree of inclusiveness measured as group equality. But the good thing is that there is a narrowing of the gap. In fact, in 2004, when the Congress Party came to power, Dr. Manmohan Singh, in one of his early speeches as the Prime Minister, had said that in 10 years, the difference between scheduled caste, scheduled tribes on one hand, and the rest of the population on the other will be completely eliminated. But that promise was not fulfilled. We are nowhere near filling up the gap. The gap has narrowed, but it still remains stubbornly positive. Therefore, we have still a long way to go in terms of achieving the objective of inclusive kind of growth. The third, inclusive kind of growth and development as a group equality. The third dimension, which is very close to many people's heart, particularly my friend from Jharkhand, I'm sure will be looking at this very closely, the regional balance as a measure of inclusiveness. Now, what has happened here is that, not too long ago, some states were called by World Bank as Bimaru states. Bimaru is an Indian word, but it took the letters from three states in particular: BI for Bihar, M for MP, MA for MP, and R for Rajasthan, and U for Uttar Pradesh. So these were backward states. So they were called Bimaru states by the World Bank, and that caught on. Now that is 10 years back, or 15 years back, as a matter of fact. Things have moved on, and these states are now trying to come up. Bihar has achieved a lot there in terms of catching up. But you have to see this. Inclusiveness should also be seen as a regional balance between advanced states which are progressing faster Generally speaking, if you make a very broad generalization, I can tell you that the states in the south are doing much better than generally states in the north. Again, states on the west side of the country are doing generally much better than the states of the east. And states on the east are actually doing much better than states in the northeast, where the backwardness is very, very high. So you have to look at inclusiveness also in terms of the dimension of regional balance. What has happened is that many of the erstwhile Bimaru states have now begun to show significant improvement in the growth performance, and the variation in the growth rates across the states have also narrowed. But both the better performing and other states are increasingly concerned about their backward regions. Please understand, you can look at regional balance not only in terms of interstate regional balance, even progressive states or advanced states have patches, regions which are extremely backward. Maharashtra, very supposed to be very progressive. What about Gadchiroli? If you look at the per capita income of Maharashtra, it's very high. From that, it's number 2 in the country. From that, you get rid of Mumbai, Pune, and Nashik. Mumbai, Pune, Nashik, and Thane. If you take these 4 away, the GDP of the remaining 29 districts of Maharashtra would be lower than the GDP of Bihar. So what happens is, we are talking about the inclusiveness as a regional distribution has to be seen not only in terms of interstate, but also in terms of the pockets of backwardness which persist in many so-called even progressive or advanced states. So states are increasingly concerned about their backward regions or districts which may not share the general improvement in the living standards experienced elsewhere. Many of these districts have unique characteristics, including high concentration of tribal population in forested areas or minorities in urban areas. And some districts are also affected by what is called left-wing extremism. This is the name that is being used, Naxalites. At government level, they don't use the word Naxalites. So the new term that has been coined is left-wing extremism, LWE districts. And last I saw 61 districts across the country, they have been identified as the left-wing extremism district, and there are 26 more which are likely to get there. So this is a very serious problem. We do not always discuss that, but out of 600 plus districts in the country, 61 districts are declared to be LWE, and many more are on the way of becoming left-wing extremism affected district. And government therefore has now a special scheme for education and skill development in those areas and general development of those areas, but the success is still eluding. So these are, so the dimension of inclusiveness in terms of regional balance or regional distribution, interstate as well as inter-regional within state or inter-district within state, is also a very important part of our general understanding of the inclusiveness. The fourth dimension of inclusiveness is inequality. That is the fourth dimension. If you look at inequality, there are various ways of measuring inequality. The Gini coefficient is one way of measuring inequality. We don't want to go into all that. But one way of measuring is that what is the proportion that belongs to top 10%. What is the ratio of the wealth that is controlled by, say, top 10% to the bottom 10%, or top 20% to bottom 20%? That ratio is an indication of the inequality in any country, and there are many different ways of calculating. Now, some increase in inequality for a growing country like India, which is coming up the way we did, some increase in inequality during a period of rapid growth and transformation may be unavoidable, and it even be tolerated if it is accompanied by sufficiently rapid improvement in the living standards of the poor. However, the increase in inequality with little or no improvement in the living standards of the poor is a recipe for social tensions. And this is something which is very, very important to understand. You know what, earlier in the 70s and 1980s, there was a big debate in our country that there were some people were championing the cause of trickle-down theory. They were saying that when the growth takes place, it will trickle down to poor. Naturally, it is going to happen. On the other hand, those who were on the left of the ideological balance, they were saying that there is no trickling down taking place. What the hell are you talking about? There is no trickle down. Whatever growth is taking place, that's only in the upper echelons, and it is not percolating to the poor. True. Now, my argument then, and is even today, is that it's not the question of whether trickle down succeeded or failed. It's the question of, do you have enough growth in the first place? If the growth rate is itself low, there is nothing to trickle down. On the other hand, if the growth rate is high, there would be something to trickle down if there are appropriate policies which are followed. Please remember the number that I've given you from 1951 to 1986. For 36 years, our growth rate was only 3.5%. And our population was growing at the rate of 2.2% per year. Which means that our per capita income was rising at a measly rate of only 1.3% per year. So when the country is growing at 3.5%, there is nothing to percolate down, right? So trickle down is bound to fail. When the growth rate became 7% and then 8% and then 9.3%, then you have enough stuff to percolate. So at the higher level of growth, percolation can take place provided that there are sufficient number of pro-poor policies. And that is what the last government was trying to do in terms of Mahatma Gandhi, Narendra, and many other social policies that were followed. So the point here is that you have to remember that inequality, particularly when a country is going through a rapid transformation, is sure. 5 minutes. So when the country is growing rather fast or rapidly, there would be enough to percolate, but there would be a period during which the inequality would always grow to begin with. But if it continues to happen all the time, then it is a sure recipe for disaster in terms of creating social tensions and breaking the cohesiveness of the social fabric. So inequality is yet another fourth dimension of inclusiveness. And the fifth and final dimension of inclusiveness that I want to mention, and that's the final point, then we'll take a break, and that is inclusiveness and empowerment. No, this is so important that I should spend 10 minutes on that. So what we'll do is that we'll take a break for 10-15 minutes. After we come back, I will start with this final dimension of inclusiveness in terms of empowerment, and then we will look at the other forms of economic sustainability in terms of environmental and ecological considerations. So let's stop here and take a break for 15 minutes. But in 15 minutes, we are back. I'm going to get a lot of credit because of that award also.
No, you already have what award?
Okay. You know, there is one educational institution here, and the RSS chief is coming to the evening. they are going to give 7 awards to 7 rishis in education. So I'm so old that now I'm being called rishi.
You ready for many questions and answers?
So it will raise more questions than answers.
आखाडे काय तुम्ही घंटे गेले होते नहीं मुझे कि सब लोग बैठ कर कौन
कौन ऑफिस में कौन बैठता है मेरे बाहर भी बैठते हैं
वैसे ही कोई लाइब्रेरी में जाता है अरे
लाइब्रेरी में जाने की जरूरत नहीं है ऑफिस के पास
कृष्णा मैम वो सर ने बोला हमारे अविनाश
अरे इसे पुढचा आहे मागचं म्हणजे काय आहे गार्डनचं मोठून गेला ना ते सगळे सगळे
क्या मिलता है?
Then ask my mom to just doing some other work and she started to get your photos. Those photos and
Bureaucratic until the mayors council.
this
Yeah. Mm.
దాని కూడా ఫోన్ చేస్తున్నాను.
అదే అది వెయిట్ చేస్తాము అని అంటారు. ఒకవేళ రీజన్ కన్ఫర్మ్ అయింది అని అంటే
సో అదే నాకు ఒకసారి ట్రైనింగ్ కానీ ఇంకా రెడీ అవ్వడం డాడీ రిటర్న్ ఎప్పుడు వస్తారు వైజాగ్ నుంచి? అదే ఏంటి ఒకవేళ కుదిరితే డాడీ రిటర్న్ టికెట్ చూడమన్నారు, వైజాగ్ చూసాను ఉన్నాయని చెప్తున్నాను. ఫ్రైడేనా? సాటర్డే ట్రైన్ అయితే లేదు. అదే డాడీ ఒక్కడే వెళ్తున్నానా? అది టికెట్ సో అదే అయితే రిటర్న్ టికెట్ చెప్తున్నారు, నేను చూసాను ఇంకా బస్సు ట్రైన్ లేవు. వచ్చేసింది.
India dynamic success career. I have a liberty. तुम किसमें करते हो? हरीश मेरे मेरी और अपने बैठ के नीचे दे दो भाई शाम को कोई आने वाला है क्या? बैठ के नीचे में मेरा टीम हो गया
खाना नहीं
याद रहे नहीं वो आए तभी स्टार्टिंग में ही बोला मेरा दाल रोटी बोलना
I counted 10, which again.
Okay, friends, let's continue our discussion. You know, we spoke about the 4 different dimensions of inclusiveness. We were talking about inclusiveness as poverty reduction, inclusiveness as group equality, inclusiveness as regional balance, inclusiveness as inequality, and finally, we are at inclusiveness as empowerment. Now, that is the final notion. There are many other dimensions, but these 5, I believe, are the main dimensions when we talk about inclusiveness. Inclusiveness is not just about ensuring a broad-based flow of resources or benefits or economic opportunities. It is also about the empowerment and participation. It is a measure of success that we have achieved in building a participatory democracy, that people are no longer prepared to be passive recipients of benefits doled out by the government. Earlier, you know, India was the only country where we used to refer to government as the Mai Baap Sarkar, because all parties, the political leaders kept telling the people on the street, "Ki hum hai na, main hu na," was the thing that you look forward to everything by the government, and which was wrong. No government of any party can do everything for everybody in the population. It's as simple as that. That is why they used to say that the politicians must learn to say no, and bureaucrats must learn to say yes. That is our major problem, that politicians never say no and the bureaucrats never say yes. So that needs to change. But now what has happened is that there is a general level of awareness, and people are no longer content with just dole being dished out to them. People are beginning to demand these benefits and opportunities as rights. If you see the policy change that has taken place, you know, more and more things are becoming rights-based, not entitlement-based. The entitlement themselves are being rights-based. Take the case of not only from right to education, even Mahatma Gandhi Narendra scheme is basically a rights-based scheme that if you are in the rural area, then as a matter of right, you will get 100 days of wages, and the government must provide the job for you, minimum 100 days in a year. So that is rights. It is no longer a benefit that is passed on. It is a matter of right which is enforceable. So it's an enforceable right. So we are moving towards, with the people's awareness growing about their about and their general understanding about public policy, people are demanding as a right, and that is why the issues which are now dominating the public policy discussions are governance, accountability, and people's participation, which is unprecedented. Never before the public policy discussions were centered so much on the issue of governance, accountability, and people's participation. And therefore, there is a growing concern about corruption that has come to the forefront, and there is so much happening there in terms of the debate and the court cases. Part of this dimension of empowerment is also employment. You know, Mahatma Gandhi Narendra scheme is a very, very good example. There is some talk, there was some talk at the time of last budget, if you remember, that they were saying that, Mahatma Gandhi Narendra scheme is a waste, and this is a bad scheme. That's what Modi ji had said. And then there was apprehension that this scheme, they will reduce the allocation for this scheme. Fortunately, the wiser council prevailed, and they actually increased the allocation for Mahatma Gandhi Narendra scheme, although marginally. But they have created an apprehension that they may take it away. In fact, it's my considered view that this government so far has not shown the social sensitivities which are required for inclusive growth. Not that I'm going to the extent of saying what Rahul Gandhi is saying, ye soot boot ki sarkar hai. I'm not talking about that. What I am saying is that socially, the sensitivities that are required to be seen in terms of inclusive growth policies, I have not seen so far. And this budget I will watch very carefully. First of all, now, for example, take the last year's finance minister's speech. Last time he was presenting the first full-fledged budget of the government. Because the first budget that he presented was for a truncated period. It was basically filling in. But this one was a regular one. And, if you look at the total time spent in the budget speech was about 85 minutes, I think. Out of 85 minutes of budget speech, how much time was dedicated to agriculture? 5 minutes, 4.5 minutes to be precise. Now, for a country which has 56% population, which looks to agriculture for their livelihood, is it a good idea to spend only 4.5 to 5 minutes on agriculture? Was there a word mentioned about the farmers' free side? No, there was no mention. In many pockets, including Maharashtra, there is a very sharp increase in the farmers' suicide. There was no talk about that. Even about and I have pointed this out to earlier, and I did that. There, on the day of budget, there was a debate, me and Prakash Zavadekar. And Prakash Zavadekar was saying, one of the Marathi channels, Prakash Zavadekar was saying, this budget is very good for the poor and the downtrodden. And I rubbished his claim on the spot. And I pointed out that actually the minister had played a trick. And for the scheduled caste sub-plan, if you remember, I talked to you about scheduled caste sub-plan, didn't I? We had a detailed discussion on scheduled caste sub-plan, according to which the scheduled caste and according to the tribal sub-plan, the tribals are supposed to, government is supposed to earmark planned expenditure in proportion, at least in proportion to their share in the population. That is the norm. But no government has been doing that, and it has been going on for a very long time. They always earmark much less than the share of population. Part of that money gets diverted to other purposes. Part of that is lapsed. It is unutilized. All kinds of things have happened. That is the difference between promise and the delivery. Last year's budget, not only what the finance minister did was to mention that we have provided 30,000 crore to scheduled caste plan. Now, by itself, it looks very impressive. 30,000 crore, very good. In all other cases, he was saying, last year this was the provision, this year we are making this provision. About the only thing about where he did not compare with his own past track record was scheduled caste plan, where he said, we have spent earmarked 30,000 crore. It was about 19,000 crore less than what was provided for last year, and about 39,000 crore less than what was warranted by the share of population. And you will see that in the budget, this budget also, similar thing will be done. This is not pro-poor, my friend. In fact, I had made an allegation purposely to be provocative to Prakash Javadekar that you are reducing the corporate tax rates by 4 percentage points. And by the same token, you are taking away 39,000 crores from the funds which are going to scheduled caste. So can we say that scheduled castes are being given less amount of money to pay for the tax concessions that you are giving to the corporates? And there was no answer. His only answer was that states are now being given more money as a proportion of GDP. They are going to get as a proportion of the total tax revenue. That was the recommendation of Finance Commission. That had nothing to do with the BJP government. From 24% to 32%, that was raised. So he said the states will get more money, and therefore the scheduled caste will get more money from the states. To compensate for that, we have reduced the central government share. But we have added up total is considerably lower than earlier. That again goes to show the insensitivity, and we will have to see what happens when the budget is presented. By the way, yeah.
Earlier planning commission used to play a major role in budget preparation.
Of course.
Now who plays that role?
Nobody.
Only finance ministry.
Finance ministry, you know, there are two very important functions. I have explained the budgetary process, etc. The planned expenditure was always decided by planning commission, and allocation of the planned expenditure across the ministry was also decided by the planning commission. And we used to have like a fish market like debate with each other, you know, who gets what, that kind of thing. And then those numbers were used to be given to the finance minister, and finance minister never changes those numbers. What the finance minister has the latitude to change the non-plan expenditure. But plan expenditure was entirely prerogative of the planning commission, and non-plan expenditure was entirely prerogative of the finance minister. Now, both planned as well as non-planned expenditure is entirely prerogative of the finance minister. Whether it is good or bad, we will have to see. But there is also talk about shutting down, eliminating this distinction between planned expenditure and non-planned expenditure. It has been recommended several times, but not accepted. Maybe in this budget, they will announce that we are breaking down that distinction, because they have abolished planning commission. Today, Niti Aayog, in my opinion, is not seen or heard anywhere. It is not doing any. I don't see Niti Aayog performing any role, concrete role. Do you see, for example, that in the meetings that the Prime Minister had with all the secretaries and the fast tracking growth, do you know Niti Aayog members were not even invited for that? So I think that change has not turned out for the good. And knowing the people who are working there, they are also completely frustrated. We don't know how things will fan out. But my feeling is that this government, is not willing to give any credit to anything that has happened in the past. I think wisdom lies in recognizing that they have done this. We want to add on this and make it so big. That would be fair for, it would be just and fair, and it would give the right kind of impression. However, this government pretends as if previous governments have done nothing and we are writing the history now. So I have very serious problem with that kind of statement. Take the case of skill development. Enormous amount of work was done by the last government on the skill development. And I know it because I was in charge of it. There was no separate Ministry of Skill Development, and enormous amount. The challenge that Manmohan Singh had given to skill 500 million people by the year 2022, that was a huge challenge. And the entire network has been set, all the institutions have been created, and everything is going on well. Now the new government does not even talk about any of those, and Modi ji went on record that India was a scam, known as a scam India. We want to make it skill India. Now making skill India is of course a very, very valid kind of objective, but to say that you are rediscovering the wheel, as if you have got the secret of universe. A lot of work was done earlier. You want to build on that. You can change the name, call it Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, I don't care. But you have to continue the schemes and make them work. And recognize what you look actually bigger if you recognize what was done by the earlier government and add that this is what I'm adding. People would look forward to that. Anyway, so let's come back to the main theme that we're talking about. The final aspect that I want to talk about is the environmental sustainability. We have seen the inclusive growth, various six dimensions of inclusive growth. We have to also see some dimensions of sustainability, sustainable growth, because we started with inclusive and sustainable growth. Particularly two dimensions of sustainability. One dimension of sustainability we have already talked about. I have said that very many times, I think in this forum, which is that we are having this demographic dividend, and now everybody knows about it. Modi ji has quoted those numbers very many times. But basically, we are having a large and growing economy, a large and growing country. And if you look at the share of youth, the proportion of youth has been rising. The proportion of working age population in India has been rising. And that is what is called demographic dividend. The average age of Indians today is about 24, 25. And by the year 2020, it would be about 29. And when the average age of India is 29, the average age of Americans would be 37, China would be 37, 38, Western Europe would be 43, 44, and Japan would be 48, 49. Which means that we have this great benefit in terms of demographic dividend. That is what makes us look to the future with very optimistic way and with a very positive kind of outlook. That is why Make in India and all that. However, the point that I would like to emphasize that this slow so-called demographic dividend is a window of opportunity that is not available forever. This is a window of opportunity that becomes available, that has been fortuitously become available to us now, and it would be valid for next 15 years at best. After 15 years, in India also, we will have larger proportion of our population getting older. So the large and growing young population will no longer exist after some time. And therefore, we have to make the best out of this 15-year window of opportunity that has become available to us. And the only way to harness this demographic dividend, I have been saying, is to focus on two sectors: education and skill development on one hand, and health sector on the other. And on both sectors, we are way behind where we ought to have been. These are the two most neglected sectors so far, and we need to focus attention on that. What will happen if we don't do that? If we don't set things right, if we do not put our house in order as far as the education and skill development on one hand and health sector on the other is concerned, what will happen is that this demographic dividend will become a demographic nightmare. It will become a demographic nightmare because in absence of harnessing the demographic dividend, in absence of making the right kind of changes in education, skill development, and health sector, what will happen is that we will be adding the mouths to feed, but not the hands that can work. So adding mouths to feed, but not adding the hands that work would mean social tensions will go on rising to the point of breaking down the system. So this demographic dividend will become a demographic nightmare if we want to, if we fail to harness this demographic dividend, because this is a fortuitously made available opportunity, window of opportunity that is going to be with us for next 15 years or so. And if that happens, regrettably, I think the future generations will never forgive us. You should consider yourself very fortunate that you are at this age when the country is taking off and when we have this opportunity for next 15 years where there would be large growing population, there would be larger share of working population, and one of the estimates shows that by the year 2022, the global shortage of technically trained person power would be about 63 billion people. So worldwide, there would be shortages of technically trained person power, about 63 million. And by the year 2022, the only country which will have a surplus in terms of numbers, sheer numbers, not trade, but sheer numbers, is India. India will have 47 million surplus people, young people available in the working force. So if we give the right kind of education and skill development to all our teeming millions, we can, in near future, what make in India? We in future can become the kind of resource base for the entire world. We will be reservoir of person power working everywhere else in the world. Even China, which has a larger population than India, is having acute shortage today of technically trained person power. And if we train our people, who are basically more brilliant, I believe, than anybody else in the world, if you give them the right kind of skills, I think we can conquer the world. We can become a reservoir for the entire world. So if we want to talk about sustainability of our economic growth, we have to talk about setting our house in order in education as well as in health. The other dimension of sustainability is ecological and environmental dimension of sustainability. There, we need to refocus on a lot of things. I think it would be fair to say that no development process can afford to neglect environmental consequences of economic activity. It's very important. Or allow unsustainable depletion and deterioration of natural resources. Please note this. No development process can afford to neglect the environmental consequences of economic activity or allow unsustainable depletion and deterioration of natural resources. Unfortunately, the experience of development in many countries and our own past experience in some respect suggests that this can easily happen unless appropriate steps are taken at an earlier stage. Now, it is easier said than done. Let me give you an example which all of you should be knowing. You know, for the Western Ghat in our country, in Maharashtra, you know, there was my colleague from National Agricultural Council, Madhav Gadgil, prepared a report which was very damaging, that you have to stop using this ghat and you are destroying the natural resources, and he gave a report. He was my colleague in National Advisory Council. They got rid of him from National Advisory Council for that. You know that? This is a well-known secret. He lost his position, but he became very critical and he said, you can't do that. Now, whenever you ask people, give people a choice, you want economic activity. Unfortunately, our needs are so immediate, we are all willing to talk about environmental concerns for other areas and for other people. But when it comes to our own livelihood, we say, "No, either mat kijiye." Wo either economic growth is very important, people must get jobs, people must get schools, blah, 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 blah. So, there is a trade-off here. So what happened was, when that committee was done, we decided, then the planning commission appointed a committee, and another colleague of mine who was an expert, who was ISRO chief once upon a time, and now he's the JNU chancellor. So his committee was appointed. He's a great scientist, ISRO chief he was. So he diluted that to some extent, but the political people still did not like it. The previous government did not like it. This government agreed with the previous government, although they are not required. So there is a kind of tacit agreement not to implement that report. So which means that let the depletion of the natural resources take place, but it should not happen. And even if it happens at the cost of growth, we should not. We should go ahead with giving preponderance or more importance to growth rather than giving priority to sustainable development or sustaining the environment and ecological balance there. So this is one example to show how, we tend to be, we all, not only in India, everywhere else, we tend to be myopic in terms of looking at the immediate gains rather than the long-term losses. And therefore, if you really want to talk about sustainability of growth and economic development, you must have this ecological and environmental considerations also, dimensions also built into your development process. Development cannot take place with, now another aspect of this ecological and environmental thing is energy. Development cannot take place without additional energy, and the energy requirement of development will have to be reconciled with the objective of protection of environment. The economy, our economy depends heavily on coal and hydropower to meet its energy needs. And development of each of these energy sources involves potential trade-offs with conservation of forest and the objective of avoiding displacement of people. As you are fully aware, there is a massive deforestation that has taken place. And we have mindlessly shrunk our natural resources in terms of the forest, and it has the social dimension in terms of displacement of very large number of people. But that has happened, and all that is being done to meet our energy requirements, and coal as well as hydropower. Narmada Dam, Narmada Sarovar is one good example, and there are many examples. So there are trade-offs with conservation of forest and the objective of avoiding displacement of people. We need to manage these conflicts and objectives more efficiently. Again, easier said than done, with adequate compensation for those dispossessed and appropriate remedial steps to correct for the loss of forest cover where this is unavoidable. These are all words. I'm quoting this from Planning Commission document. I myself contributed to the plan document, but this is, friends, easier said than done. In reality, there are very tough choices to be made, and regrettably, the immediate future has much bigger bearing on policymakers than the long-term considerations for the economy as a whole. The issue of sustainability, environmental sustainability, also has a global dimension because of the threat of climate change caused by accumulation of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere due to human activity. The GHG emission in any country accelerates the process of global warming. This is obviously an area where global cooperation is needed. And recently, as you are aware, there was an agreement, and we are playing a big role in the Committee of Nations there. Developing countries like India have consistently been arguing that it is the industrialized countries that have historically contributed to the bulk of the accumulated stock of greenhouse gases and are also most able to pay. They must bear the burden of global mitigation and adjustment. So, since what is happening today, we are developing, but the so-called developed countries, in their process of development earlier, they have destroyed a lot of natural resources, and now we are in the urge for growth in our aspiration, meet the aspirations of growth. We developing countries are doing that. They are saying that aapne to itna damage karke rakha hai. So now it is our collective responsibility, all right, to share the burden. But since you have benefited for so long and so enormously, and you are in better position to pay, you should bear the larger part of the mitigation cost that is involved in the control of greenhouse gases. And we are doing that. India is participating in ongoing international negotiations under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climatic Change. The progress was minimal until recently, but there was a breakthrough in the recent past, and India continues to play a very, very important role there, or a large and growing role, but this is something that needs to take under our consideration. We cannot abstain from taking action to deal with climate change until international solution is found. So we can't simply say that we'll wait until the global negotiations bear fruit. We have to do something of our own, and you have read about Delhi, the kind of problems that were created. Every third person was, the Supreme Court Chief Justice said that in my own house, my grandchild wears a mask because, everybody has the problem of lungs and breathing problems and all kinds of, and we don't even have an idea about how much damage has been done because of the pollution, and that is because of the human activity, particularly the number of cars. That is why that even an odd experiment was done, and I'm told that it is going to come back. The good thing, April. Okay, 15th April? Yeah. This has been advocated for a long time, but quite frankly, the basic requirement of doing anything like this is to have, you must have an alternate public transport system, which is reasonably efficient. Today, the public transport system, I cannot dare to go by a bus in Delhi. I cannot dare. At my age, and it's impossible. So the days on which my car would not be allowed, I would rather work from home. That has the same effect. But the point is, without the public sector, during the period that they did that experiment, schools were closed. So school buses were deployed in a big way to provide as an alternate means. Delhi has a very poor system so far of public transport. They are trying to improve. So one of the things that was criticized was that, why are you rushing it? You are taking this decision mindlessly without creating adequate public transport system. To which their answer was, and I agree with them, that you can't go on waiting for the ideal situation. So we must experiment. That is why it was done as an experiment. And I'm happy to say that I think the experiment was largely successful because people saw the benefit. People of Delhi are not very civil. I don't think they are very tolerant because in Delhi, as far as I know, everybody carries some chip on their shoulder. You know, everybody. You know, मेरा भांजा भतीजा वो प्रेसिडेंट के ऑफिस में काम करता है, वो पीएम की इधर मेरा आदमी है. You know, everybody is connected, or at least they believe, and they are very, very intolerant in their civic life, as I have seen. Or that's my impression. This is impressionistic. However, they were very good about this because they saw in a couple of days that the number of vehicles on the road is very small comparatively. Half the vehicles were not out. And also the roads where it was impossible to navigate, you know, you could go. So they saw the advantage and therefore they responded very well. So our first couple of days were tricky. After that, they responded very well. In the meantime, I believe that Delhi government, I'm not a great fan of Aam Party government, but I think this was the right step that they have taken. It was tried in Brazil, it was tried in Venezuela, it was tried in many Latin American countries with great success, and it should be tried elsewhere. But ideally, they should have a reasonably decent alternate public transport system. And knowing the fact that our people, you know, nobody is better than we Indians to beat the system. So there were lots of people in Delhi who quickly bought even number car if they had odd number car. You know, so that would in fact increase the number of vehicles rather than decrease. But I think on the whole the experiment was successful. I do not know what are the preventive steps that they are going to take from now until. No, but that was there earlier also. Exemption. I will tell you something. Again, very unusual for Delhi. Even last time, when old people, sick people, women's driving individual singly, you know, women driving the car, they were exempted. And even with the, you know, even when if they found that old man somebody was being taken to the hospital, you know, they exempted. They did not penalize. So it was really implemented in a humane sort of way. Now, how long, if it becomes a regular thing, it was an experiment, remember. Everybody adjusted to the experiment very well. Now, if it becomes permanent or it doesn't remain an experiment, I think the adjustment would be far more difficult and therefore people would respond to that. I only wish people don't respond by adding more cars in their possession rather than, you know, sharing the car or using the public mode of transport. Yeah. Any further question?
Adding to that, private companies like Ola started sharing vehicles. They started the taxi service that several people have been using.
Yeah.
There are like a lot of private opportunities.
Yeah. There, what happens is, how you implement the regulations becomes an issue. Because, you know, earlier there used to be private taxis in smaller towns or service cars. You should have seen, I have seen, you know, it was before your time, so when the ST, the state transport was, that is the red and yellow, state transport was not reaching smaller places. Those days, some private operators were allowed, but in one car, you know, service car used to be a little bigger size. It was somewhere between a small car and a small tempo. They would put 20 or 25 people in the same car. Now, this is inhuman. Not only indecent, it is inhuman and vulnerable. These people are vulnerable to major accidents. And that was happening. So it depends on how many licenses that you give, how do you regulate. If, you know, if your regulations are loosely implemented and people misuse, for example, this bus that you're talking about, or mini cars that you're talking about, mini buses that you're talking about. Very good idea, sounds very good. But if they put people, stuff a lot of people in there, that could become a security hazard. And it would be, you know, it can blow up on the face of the country. So It has many dimensions that one has to look at. Yeah.
In the same Delhi point, what about the public or people coming from other states to Delhi? They are not accepted.
No, everybody was, the same rule was there. I think the exemptions, the only exemptions given was people, women driving car, the woman could be driving even on our car. Old people going on, somebody will take to the hospital, some kind of emergency, they relax. Now, I don't know what they are going to do when it comes back. But Kejriwal has promised that it will come back in a more refined format. Those are his words. So what the refined format is, I have no idea. But hopefully the public transport system would be improved in a huge sort of way. For example, they are talking about applying 4,000 brand new buses to be bought from other states. That they are talking about. That will alleviate a lot of pressure. People don't mind. But if you look at the buses which are there now, people like me at my age cannot enter that kind of crowd. Impossible. But if there are the nice buses which are reasonably charged, I think people will take to it big. Metro is doing wonders. Metro in Delhi is one of the finest and is doing very well, but it's very limited. It has to be much bigger. Yeah. Yes, absolutely, that is possible. But these things do not happen all of a sudden. Now, the non-conventional form of energy are getting more and more important. Until recently, the per unit cost of energy created out of non-conventional sources was very high. Solar energy, for example. But ultimately the bottom line is how you for fun. Look at ecological consideration and the environmental balance. So how much you have to pay. Fortunately, there have been many breakthroughs, and apparently the cost of non-conventional energy is rapidly coming down, and if this continues to happen, that augurs very well for future. Unfortunately, only in a limited sense, the global prices of oil have crashed. After so many decades, it has come down below $30 per barrel. Remember, it had gone to $126 per barrel. From 1973, it was only $3.50 per barrel in 1973 until the Yom Kippur War, when the OPEC suddenly realized that they had such a nuisance value. During that war, some ships were held up in Suez Canal. And then, because of that, world prices started rising. And then OPEC suddenly realized that they're sitting on a gold mine, that they could raise the prices. So from $3 or $3.50 per barrel, in 1 week, the price went to $12 per barrel. That was 300% increase in price. That was huge. That was a shock for everybody. And all those big gas guzzler cars, they were replaced. Japanese were the first one to replace big cars by small ones. You remember, we used to talk about Impala and all that. Those were gas guzzlers. Japan started bringing small cars, and then finally Americans also followed, and the Indians also followed. We did not save any energy, but we tried to imbibe the new technology and smaller car, etc. But today the situation is the world prices of oil are collapsing. This may change. The global economy is in a very, very uncertain mode. We don't know how it will play out. But if the world prices of oil keep falling like this, the growth of non-conventional energy is going to be stunted, because the world oil-based energy will still be cheaper. And if it continues to remain cheap, technologically, solar and other non-conventional forms of energy is getting cheaper. The prices are coming down. But if the oil prices are crashing and the non-conventional energy prices remain higher than the oil prices, per unit of comparable unit of energy, I think to that extent the growth of non-conventional energy would be stunted. The only ray of hope there, ray of hope is the wrong expression. The only so-called positive development there could be for the non-conventional energy would be that in the next 1 year the prices would again start going up if the world economy recovers. China crashing and world economy slowing down, we don't know. But sooner or later the prices of oil are going to go up. Technology-driven fall in the non-conventional prices, however, will continue. So a stage will come when non-conventional energy will take preponderance over the conventional energy. Now, but there is a lot of opposition. Look at, the opposition to Jaitapur atomic energy power plant. Shiv Sena, which is part of the government, is going hammer and tongs against it, and we don't realize that this is going to hurt us. Now they're only saying is that we are all for it, but don't keep it here, take it elsewhere. No, this doesn't solve the problem. By putting your own dirt in somebody else's door does not solve the huge either. That problem remains. France, for example, I'm told that 26% of their energy requirements are met from atomic energy, whereas in our case it is less than 1%. And there's a big opposition to all the new efforts. So it's an evolving situation. But bottom line is that you cannot achieve inclusive growth, you cannot achieve sustainable growth without looking at all these dimensions of sustainability. So inclusive growth is also per se a requirement of sustainable growth and development, and it has many other dimensions, social, ecological, environmental. All these dimensions must be kept under view when we frame the policies. Again, it is easier said than done, but we have no other option in the near future. We're going to stop here for today. Tomorrow we are meeting at 9 o'clock, and tomorrow what we are going to do is to talk a little bit about scheduled castes, a lot about scheduled tribes, a lot about DNTs, the denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes. We are going to talk about minorities, and we are also going to talk about elderly people. So these 5 sections of society which are considered vulnerable, about the scheduled caste I have talked a lot, so I'll talk less on scheduled caste, also a little bit about scheduled tribe, but mostly we'll talk about the DNTs, the minorities, and the elderly people in our society. That will cover and complete our discussion of social justice. Okay? Any other quick question before I leave? Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
The problem is even government realizes that this is the white and gold issue, that is this issue. The way they address this issue is not that positive. I mean, education is not about improving the quality of education. The government addresses this issue. They say that just provide institutions. We need activity-based education. We need more individual thinking type of education. That will be in health sector. To address that issue, government will talk about medicines, pharmaceuticals, or hospitals. That's the last stage of medicine. Before there is preventive stage. So, how are you going to do that?
No, there is no option but to increase our spending on education. Quality of spending becomes a later issue. Let me just give you 2 numbers and stop there. Education. Kothari Commission recommended in 1966 that we must spend at least 6% of our GDP as a public government expenditure on education. Where are we today? Until 2009, until 2007, we were less than 3.5%. So 1966 to 2007, is 41 years. In 41 years, instead of going towards 6%, we came up only to 3.5%. Then in the 11th plan and the 12th plan, for which I work, we raised that proportion. So I was looking after education, if you remember. So we raised it, but how much will you raise it in? You can't raise it immediately. You know, but from 3.5%, the government raised it to about 4.2%. That is where we are. 6% is still very far away. That is one example. So we are not spending enough money. We talk, our leaders talk a lot about education and its importance. Now Modi is also talking about demographic dividend. But please watch how much money, additional money we spend on education. If that doesn't go up, last time it did not go up. Last budget, the expenditure on higher education actually declined. So you have to see the difference between what they talk and what they actually do. One. Second, look at the health. Do you know that we are spending on health lesser percentage of our GDP than the most backward country even in Africa? Our expenditure on public health was 1.04%. So 1%. 1% of our GDP. It should be immediately raised to at least 3%. And this is the need for many years accumulated. What are we talking about? So we don't spend. We don't spend at all. Do we not recognize the problem? Yes, we recognize. Yes, we give speeches on that. But when it comes to spending, we don't. So last government, in the last year, like in 2012, the Manmohan Singh finally accepted the recommendation that we were pushing for to double our expenditure on public health in the 3-year period. So from 1% to 2% plus. So he has agreed, it is there, the decision is there, but again, in the actual reality, we are not very far, moved very far away from the 1% norm. So again, that is something that you should be looking out for in the budget that is going to come up. Yeah.
Many countries provide compulsory health insurance to India and India.
Sure, of course. No, insurance in my opinion is a big racket. RSBY is a good scheme. RSBY is the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana is a good scheme, but Indians have this great ability of running a racket. So with that, it's suffering. In America, the entire health sector is a huge racket, huge racket. They have, it is a subject that requires separate discussion, but my own, I've seen it at close, unbelievable. And there, anything going wrong, you know, the doctors are sued. Doctors are sued, so doctors always insure among themselves against somebody suing them. So that raises the cost for the patient. Remember that. Insurance has to be paid for by doctor. Where will he recover from? He will recover from people, patients. Yeah. So that's a different ballgame altogether. Okay. So we stop here and we meet tomorrow at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, please. Okay. Is it very difficult to reach there? How long should it take from here?
You see the traffic at least 1 hour.
And just 1 hour. It can be more than 1 hour.
Yeah, minimum 45 minutes. It's an hour.
I know. Okay. All right.
टॉपिक आता है ना दूसरा दिन में कहा जो लेके उठिएगा